Welcome to the show. Beautiful Tuesday. Glad to have you with us today. We've got a load of information we're going to talk about today. I'm Sean Stiers. Jesse Stiers is here as well. In about a half an hour, so I guess closer maybe to 25 minutes or so. David Lake, who covers the Miami Hurricanes from InsideTheU.com, is going to join me. Jesse, we start off with not quite breaking news, but another day and another commitment for Marcus Freeman and the Fighting Irish. Four-star defensive lineman Sagun Alexander. I don't know how to pronounce his first name correctly. I know Brian Driscoll said it on the show last week. Brian will be here to talk more about him. Alexander, who was originally in the 2028 class and reclassified to 27. He's 6'4", 270 pounds. And he joins the likes of David Fullarunsho, Aiden O'Neill, Abraham Cisse, and Jackson Vaughn on the Notre Dame defensive line as commitments for Notre Dame's 2027 class. This, of course, comes after the Jones brothers, Julius Jones Jr. and Andre Jones, each committed yesterday to Notre Dame. One in the secondary, one at wide receiver, and today defensive lineman, Jess, as Marcus Freeman just keeps this haul going on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, it's impressive to see him continue to stack these recruits. I can't say that I know too much about the four-star defensive lineman, but I do like his frame. 6'2", 300 pounds. That's already a big, beefy frame. Someone that you'd probably likely see on the interior. Defensive tackle, three technique, as Notre Dame kind of uses them. So, again, I can't say that I know a tremendous much about him, but it feels like every day I wake up, there's a new Notre Dame commit right now.
Every day we're shuffling. That's pretty much what it is right now. They just keep raking it in. My apologies for that little attempt right there. But John Doe 09 in the YouTube chat says Sagun is how you say it. Sagun, apparently. Sagun Alexander. Okay, well, he committed to Notre Dame today. I'm sure Brian Driscoll and Trevor Trowbridge talked about it a bit over on their show on the Irish Breakdown YouTube channel. And, of course, don't forget, you can watch this show live on either the Irish Breakdown YouTube channel or the Sports Radio WSBT YouTube channel. And while you're there on Sports Radio WSBT, throw it a follow. It will do us good. It will do you good as well. You'll always know when a live show is coming up. Beezer12 Washing Beard 507 in the YouTube chat says, I just really don't understand how Marcus Freeman keeps landing all these 4- and 5-star recruits shopping down a different aisle. Plus, Jad Bowden was the secret sauce, right? Yeah, a little shade thrown in a couple of different directions. I said this, I think, last year. It really feels like, Chad Bowden did a good job of recruiting at Notre Dame. I think the recruiting philosophy is a little different, and I definitely think even last year, in last year's cycle, and it's continuing in this year's cycle, since Chad Bowden is gone, it feels to me like the defensive line recruiting has picked up these last two cycles.
Yeah, I think it definitely has. The addition of Charlie Partridge obviously is going to help that out, but that also comes from a head coaching emphasis, and we know that Marcus Freeman wants to be strong in the trenches. They probably have one of the most talented offensive line rooms in the country, and now their defensive line is starting to catch up. So that is promising to see. When you have good trenches, it makes everyone else's life that much easier on both offensive and defensive side of the ball.
Absolutely. And again, we're going to talk with David Lake, talk about Miami. Speaking of a team that's good in the trenches, they were great in the trenches last year, helped propel them to a national championship game appearance, just like Notre Dame did the year before. And we'll be talking to David Lake about the Hurricanes coming up here in just a little bit. In the meantime, other end of the spectrum, we got Sagun Alexander committing today. Some unfortunate news for Brenan Vernon, another Notre Dame defensive lineman. He has medically retired. I believe Matt Freeman from ISD was the first to report the news. Vernon was himself a 4-star recruit in Notre Dame's 2023 class and was a top 60 recruit, according to Rivals. He played in just 4 games in 3 years at Notre Dame. He missed all of last season with an MCL injury, so his career came down to a pair of games against Florida State and Virginia 2 years ago, and a pair of games in 2023 against Tennessee State and Wake Forest. Jesse, some very unfortunate news, obviously, for Vernon with, an abbreviated college career that just was never able to take off.
Yeah, that really does suck, especially considering, the caliber of player that he was, a top 60 player, a consensus 4-star recruit in the 2023 class, like you mentioned. I guess if you wanted to bring up a positive side of this, is it does free up a roster spot, and you don't know how much that kind of also went into the conversation with Brenan. Just kind of looked like, hey, what's kind of best for both sides here, and that's kind of the transparency that you're looking for as a player. I'm sure it wasn't an easy conversation, but again, Brenan gets to move on, gets to, kind of wrap up his career. And again, I think it does benefit Notre Dame in some regard, because you are going to free up a roster spot. And then, you know what I mean? So, it sucks, especially with someone that had so much promise and potential. But, this is one of those things that we talked about. I can't remember if it was yesterday or on Friday's show when Vince was here. This is why you can't put so much stock into what the stars are and the recruit is coming out of high school, because you just never know what's going to happen ultimately at the end of the day.
Yeah. Stars are great, but they still have to show that they can get here and show up and, develop and
stay
get
healthy.
Yeah, stay healthy is part of it as well. But there are so many guys, and they're just go back through the years. Like some guys you miss on. Some guys are undervalued coming out of high school. Some guys are obviously overvalued coming out of high school, and it's always the guys with 4 and 5 stars next to their names that you get the questions about the most, especially when they don't play. Brenan Vernon was one of those guys. And, it's interesting because he came in the 2023 class, and that was also Keon Keeley's class coming out of high school. And Keeley obviously originally committed to Notre Dame. He ultimately flipped to go to Alabama. And so Brenan Vernon, as a 4-star, like, he was expected to be one of the dudes for Notre Dame in that class, especially because Keeley was gone. He was kind of supposed to step up and be the next big defensive end, from a rushing standpoint. I mean, that class, the 2023 class, Charles Jagusah, Jeremiah Love, Drake Bowen, Christian Gray, Jaden Greathouse, Jaden Osbury, Boubacar Traore, Adon Schuler, Armel Mukum were in that class. Guys who were also in that class for Notre Dame but are now gone: Braylon James, Rico Flores, Kenny Minchie, Sam Pendleton, KK Smith, Preston Zinter. Zinter, of course, transferred to Rice, and he could end up playing tight end against Notre Dame in September when Rice comes to town. But a lot of talent in that class. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for Brenan Vernon. In the meantime, Keon Keeley coming full circle, coming to Notre Dame after a couple of years at Alabama, while Brenan Vernon retires. And, and kind of what you were talking about there as well, like the fact that I lost my train of thought, actually, on what you were
the roster spot.
The roster spot. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you see maybe another guy or two, who ends up with a medical retirement. It becomes more often. We always get this question when guys get to this point in their career. Chris asks if he got his degree. I don't know, because they don't put degree designations up on the athletic website. He has been here 3 years, so there's a good.
I would imagine he's really close.
Yeah, if he doesn't have his degree, he's probably really close, and they still will honor the scholarship for him to finish out his schooling at Notre Dame if that's what he chooses to do. So he can still walk out of here with a Notre Dame degree. But I mean, he was a defensive end who came in at 255 pounds. He was listed at 305 pounds last year, and just felt like kind of an ultimate tweener, just maybe not twitchy enough to play out there, on the edge. So they tried to move him inside. They bulked him up and just ultimately, didn't have the skill set, the traits to excel at defensive tackle either, and kind of got buried in a numbers game there with some other guys there.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what it feels like when you see someone kind of, put on that kind of mass, 50 pounds. Wasn't quite quick enough to be an elite edge rusher, but also probably wasn't big enough or physically gifted enough, like Francis Brew, for example, to play kind of on the inside. So
Yeah,
just an unfortunate situation. I would it would be really it would suck, to be honest with you, to come out of high school with that high of a recruiting profile and then kind of have the struggles that he went through and having to end your career prematurely.
for sure. For sure. So obviously, everyone wishes Brenan Vernon well, and hopefully it works out for him. And hope, who knows? Sometimes guys say they're going to medically retire, and I mean, he's got eligibility remaining. Maybe he takes a year off and tries to give it a go someplace else next year. Who knows?
Speaking of, I don't know what made me just think of this. We were talking maybe a week or two or so ago about Trey Mancini and his return to
Yeah.
the Angels. They actually DFA'd him, and he requested to be released. So I
Really?
wouldn't be surprised if Trey Mancini pops up on another MLB roster somewhere. But the Angels were basically trying to DFA him, and he was like, "I got nothing left to be DFA'd at this point." Is probably how that went. Like I'm
It's
what,
all or
34,
nothing.
35. I'm either playing on an MLB roster
That's
or
right.
not. So
Take
I'll be
me or
curious
leave
to see where he might or might not end up at the end of the day.
That's crazy. A guy shows up. Was it 3 hits or 4 hits he had?
I think he had 3 hits.
There's at least 3, yeah, that he had. We talked about it a couple weeks ago, like you said. But hopefully Trey Mancini sticks on, because he's obviously been through a lot between the cancer that he had earlier in his career, and had a couple really great years, won a World Series with the Astros. Thought that maybe the next year when he signed with Chicago, that would be really great for the Cubs, but it didn't really work out. And he's he went 3 years in between major league appearances. So hopefully it works out for Trey Mancini. Chris, by the way, asking if everyone has to be nice to the Miami guy. Well, it is preferable that you be nice to the Miami guy. Remember, he does not play or coach for Miami. He reports on Miami. So any animosity towards him is misdirected, misguided. So some other interesting little tidbits that came out this week. Little development. Notre Dame social media accounts. Have you seen this brick by brick thing that they do? I think it's like every Monday they do this. They post the names of players.
Earning the bricks?
It's like each week it's like a list of guys who are doing well in the off-season conditioning program, whether, weightlifting, conditioning, and the whole thing. And it's brick by brick is what they call it. They're earning their bricks in the summer workouts. And Charles Jagusah, one of the players who made this week's list, he, of course, missed all of last season after breaking his arm in the all-terrain vehicle accident that was nearly a year ago. 4th of July weekend will be the anniversary of that. But Jagusah running, doing some lifting from what we've heard. So how encouraging is it that Charles Jagusah showed up this week on the little brick by brick, getting recognized for his work so far?
Yeah, I think it's definitely encouraging, not only for us as fans, but definitely for someone, or I guess personally for Charles Jagusah. This is a guy very highly touted, got some playing time early on, especially when Notre Dame was going on its run to the national championship. And then this freak accident happens. He was going to be, not going to be, he was a preseason consensus All-American. There was a lot of high expectations. There were setbacks with the surgeries and the recovery. So I think it's just a good sign in general that Notre Dame is kind of pushing him along and rewarding his hard work and hoping that he can get back. And then obviously, as fans, we want Jagusah to be back so we can see the best version of the Notre Dame offensive line.
Say it with me. Jagusah.
I'll just say Charles.
Jagusah. It's not that hard. Come on, you can do it. Jagusah.
I already did it right.
It's in the pronunciation guide. You didn't do it right. So based on what we saw, I mean, yeah, it's absolutely very encouraging. This is honestly probably the most encouragement that we've had in terms of Charles Jagusah news. Since we saw him come back for the college football play. Basically since before the injury. So Yeah, see, just remember what Under Armour or Armor Dude is saying. Just listen. Just listen. Uh, but based on what we saw during the spring, here's what the first team offensive line looks like coming out of the spring. Will Black at left tackle, Anthony Knapp at left guard. Joe Otting was the center for the spring. Ashton Craig expected to go if he's healthy. Sullivan Absher at right guard, Gerby Lambert at right tackle. So if and when Charles Jagusah is healthy, where would you expect him to slot in there on that line?
I think you would have to slot him in at right tackle, right?
I'm feeling more right guard, honestly. Like
Just because of
it's either
how good Gerby Lambert is.
it feels like Lambert Jagusah for those two spots. If they obviously if they think that Lambert is the better right tackle, then you keep him out there. It feels to me just like with what the rest of the line, what it all shapes up to be, feels to me like he plugs in there at guard. But I mean, that's where when he came back during the playoffs, that's where he played first, was at guard before Knapp got hurt. But
yeah, I mean, that makes the most sense if you're trying to put your best, most talented 5 offensive linemen out there. I think you have to have Lambert and Black as your tackles. If you could have Knapp and Charles at your guards, then those are two just giants at guard. And then if you get Ashton Craig back, I mean, we could be looking at potentially the best offensive line in the country. There'd be so much talent. I mean, even without Charles, there is a ton of talent. But if you get him, it's like, I don't know. I would be afraid as an opposing defensive lineman because I don't know who you'd want to go up against
I know
in any of those matchups.
exactly, and I don't know. I guess we're what? Where are we right now? The 23rd. So we are roughly 5.5 weeks potentially away from training camp. I don't think it's going to begin in July this year. If it does, it would be probably the last day or two of July. We haven't got any official word on that yet, but that's not what I think we're anticipating. So we're at least 5 weeks away from the start of camp. It's again at least a very encouraging sign that Jagusah is able to go through whatever summer workouts that he's able to do right now, and kind of get back. To me, strength is going to be the biggest thing. Like, what's he going to be able to do with that upper body? Because when he's full strength, he's very strong. He's very physical. To me, if they get Jagusah back and he's able to play this season, it's the difference between what should be a pretty good to really good offensive line and an elite offensive line if they've got him playing on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they would be solid without him. But I think you get into that elite tier or that kind of top 5 offensive line unit in the country. And if I were a fan or I guess I am a fan, but if I were looking at the schedule and I would kind of, where I would potentially want to see him kind of slide in, that bye week after BYU in late October would be nice if he could slide in with the last 5 games, basically month of the season, get him ready and tuned up for a potential playoff run. But that would be optimal because you play BYU the 17th and then you don't play again until October 31st against Navy. If he could be back for that game against Navy, that would just be perfect timing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Like back for the stretch drive, and like it would obviously stink for somebody if they're starting all that time and he comes back and takes their place. But part of that as well is going to be, just how good they look. All right. We're going to take our break. When we come back, David Lake from Inside the U is going to join us. We're going to talk a little Miami Hurricanes football. That is just around the corner. Coming up next, weekday sports beat with IrishBreakdown.com. Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com continues. Well, it'll be a little bit later in the season this year when Notre Dame and Miami go head to head November 7th at Notre Dame Stadium, of course, after opening up the regular season against each other last year. And it's always great when our next guest comes on, David Lake from InsideTheU.com. How you doing, David? Good to see you.
Doing well, Sean. Always good to be on with you too. Got another big Miami Notre Dame game here this year. Excited to talk about it. You know, it'll be big implications once again, but it's interesting year over year and the differences of when the game is played, of course, where it's going to be played this year compared to last year, and excited to get into it here with you.
Little. I'll have to apologize. First, I was trying to remember if you've been on the show live or if we've pre-recorded in the past. If it gets a little crazy in the YouTube chat over here, just take it with a grain of salt. Because
all good.
I feel like the last time we talked, it was before the season opened up when they were getting ready to play each other last year. So I guess maybe for starters, would you have thought going into that game that Notre Dame and Miami would just end up being so kind of connected, intertwined with each other the way they were, the way things shaped up, obviously, in November with all that conversation and discussion going on?
I couldn't have projected that. I mean, I think everyone knew it was an important game, right?
Sure.
But the fact that Miami stumbled, right, twice after, earning that victory against Notre Dame with Louisville and SMU and putting themselves in that position of it being a debate whether or not they belonged in the college football playoff. And look, from the Miami perspective, I think the decision was fair in terms of, the results on the field need to matter. And I think ultimately the committee honored that. Now, I think the process to getting to that point was messed up.
That's what has, I think, the most controversy, really, right?
Right. So the process needs to be fixed. But I think and look, I get it from the Notre Dame perspective. I think, we saw how Miami got hot, went on a run in that college football playoff. I think Notre Dame certainly was a top 10 team in the country at the end of the year. They also could have got hot and gone on a similar run if they got it. So I think ultimately it was a shame from the Notre Dame perspective because they belonged in that field. It's just, the committee's going to do what the committee's going to do.
See, David's talking all nice, Notre Dame fans. You don't have anything to worry about here. He's going to be nice and objective about this whole thing. I'm curious though. Like you obviously, you hear from a lot of Miami fans. They hadn't played in 8 years prior to that game last year, and they had only played a total of 4 times, I think, in like 30 plus years after they were such rivals. Prior to the 1990s. Does it feel like the rivalry itself sort of went from, maybe like I kind of felt like it was a little bit more of an afterthought still going in to last year to like on a scale of 1 to 100, 105, with the sides kind of clashing with each other.
I think it's going to be ramped up this year, and I think that's great, right? I think anytime Miami Notre Dame matters, it's a good thing for the sport. I think Miami's going to embrace putting on the villain hat, going into South Bend and having to be the away team and perform well on a stage that's away from home. So I think it's great. I think it's going to be. I mean, a lot of these preseason magazines rank that game as the top non-conference game of the season.
Right.
It's hard to push back on that, and I'm excited to go. I've never been to South Bend and witnessed a game at Notre Dame Stadium, so I know for myself, I'm thrilled to get that opportunity this year and watch this game.
We were just talking yesterday, and we've talked about it before on our show. The night game environment at Notre Dame Stadium has just grown off the charts over the last few years. So I mean, like that with like the quality of those two teams and what we expect the importance of that game could mean, it should be a great night for football in early November. Kind of a flip of the coin in terms of what weather anyone's going to get once you're up here, but should be good. Again, like they've only played a handful of times over the last 30 some years, but they're scheduled as of right now to play 6 times through 2037. As of right now, and like Notre Dame losing USC from the schedule, its biggest traditional rival. And I know Miami has Florida State, but do you think, there would be an appetite even, like Notre Dame did this contract. I think we might've talked about this before. Notre Dame did this contract with Clemson, a longer term deal. Do you think there's an appetite, even if it's just from the fan perspective, to want to see these two teams play even more often?
I think definitely. I think Miami would love to, it's all about, going back to your Clemson point, it's all about the TV revenue opportunities, right? And so I think that's where Miami would definitely embrace it. I think Miami also kind of recognizes that, the ACC schedule, the ACC slate, it can be viewed, right or wrong, whatever your opinion is, it can be viewed as an easy path. And that's certainly something that a team like Miami would have to overcome in the eyes of any college football committee any year, right? So having a team like Notre Dame on your schedule certainly strengthens your schedule. And so I agree. I think Miami would embrace that. I think especially as you noted, like, of course, Miami has that rivalry with Florida State. That program seems a little lost in the wilderness at the moment. And so they do need kind of an annual rivalry that matters, and it'd be great to have Notre Dame kind of step into that fold.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the losses to Louisville and SMU. Do you think if Miami didn't have the win over Notre Dame on its resume, do you think things are a lot dicier when it would come to the playoff selection?
100%. I think Miami, in a way, got lucky that the debate came down to Miami and Notre Dame. And Miami's trump card was we beat them on the field, right? If it was Miami and another team, I think Miami's on the outside looking in still, and it doesn't flip on that final day. So certainly I agree with that. Like the fact that the debate was Miami and Notre Dame. Unfortunately for Notre Dame, fortunately for Miami, I think on the last day you had to flip that. Now you could debate, did Notre Dame belong in over Oklahoma, Alabama, all these other teams?
Right.
To me, that's the more interesting debate, but it just got caught up in the weeds so much of Miami Notre Dame that they were sticking to their guns on them being the final at large. And from a Miami standpoint, luckily Miami had that win on the field over Notre Dame.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they lost those 2 games to Louisville and SMU in a span of of 3 games. Louisville's their first loss. Then a couple weeks later, they lose to SMU. I'm curious, like for Mario Cristobal, like when you consider the year before, they were looking like they were going to run right into the playoffs, maybe even being undefeated. Then all of a sudden at the end of the season, they lose 2 of their last 3 games. Did things like kind of heat up for Cristobal after they lost those couple games last year?
I think he definitely knew like he was letting a big opportunity slip away. And I give him credit for, and again, they got hot. They deserve credit for, kind of embracing like we got to go out there and let it rip. I think the reason why, they lost those Louisville and SMU games for different reasons. To me, the SMU game, they kind of just played a little too conservative. And, SMU ended up winning that game in overtime. And, I think from that point on, Cristobal's approach was, we have the best athletes compared to the ACC. So why are we the ones playing conservative? We just need to go out and let it rip. In addition to that, they knew that they needed style points in this, Miami and Notre Dame debate that was brewing. And so they kind of embraced that as well. But certainly I think like Mario Cristobal knew like, man, this is unfortunate that we lost to SMU and we are in this position. And but I think you also got to credit him because we've seen a lot of Miami teams, right? The rhetoric around Miami is, in the month of November, they fall apart. Now, that SMU game, I believe, if I remember, was November 1st. But from that point on, they definitely, played to their potential and continued that style of play through the college football playoff. And so, I think he did, win back a lot of trust from the fans and the administration with the way he handled things following that SMU loss. And but no doubt the vibes were bad following that SMU loss because there was just no reason for Miami to lose that game.
Feels like the vibes changed pretty dramatically though after they went on the run that they did.
Yeah.
Getting to the championship game. Does he more or less walk on water down there now, or what's it?
I think so. I mean, things are this is by far the most optimistic and just in terms of like the overall operation of a Miami program, from recruiting, development, strength and conditioning, everything, just the resources that are coming in now. Miami is operating like a top 10 program in the country. And I don't know if that was really, truly the case before this year. And so, I think Miami feels like this is just the beginning. Like they had to scratch and claw to get in the playoffs and they took advantage of that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel like now we're starting to really ascend to be a legitimate top 10 program in the country. So we'll see if they can keep that momentum going here in this season.
Well, it's interesting. He's got a fairly similar record to what Al Golden had through roughly the same amount of games down there. I mean, but the way that he's recruiting right now, and you talked about the resources, the way they're able to, pretty similar kind of, to Marcus Freeman's approach, in terms of, both high school recruiting and the transfer portal. Like, does he feel like a guy who's going to be able to maintain this probably better than any of his predecessors over the last 20 or so years?
I think so. I mean, look, there's no denying that, Mario's first year was a 5-7 year. And so that puts you behind the 8 ball. He follows that up with a 7-6 year. So those 2 seasons were bad, but look, and that's a bad starting point at Miami. That's unacceptable.
Uh-huh.
But this is the first time that they've gone back-to-back 10-win seasons since 2002, 2003. So, he has shown more an ability to sustain success more than any of his predecessors after the Larry Coker era. So I do think there is confidence he's going to be able to sustain it. I think Miami's all in on, whatever this new landscape of college football looks like. Miami's going to support Mario, and what his vision is for navigating it in terms of NIL and transfer portal and all this craziness that goes on every day in college football these days. And yeah, I can just speak to like the body types, the talent, the players that are stacked below the starters. In my opinion, it doesn't look like Miami's going to go anywhere in terms of being a legitimate top 10 team in the country and probably being the best team in the ACC for at least the next 3 years or so. And so I would be surprised if he's not able to sustain this level of success.
I'm curious, like Notre Dame, after going through the same experience, getting to the national championship game, all those additional games, obviously, to get to that point, and you're playing until, through what, late January. Notre Dame really, like, they rearranged their spring. They dialed down the contact and things like that in the spring. Did Miami kind of shake things up a little bit, being in the same situation this year?
They definitely moved spring back. I would say 2 or 3 weeks from when they typically do spring. So they moved it back, and they did bubble wrap a lot of their veteran guys, like a Mark Fletcher, the running back, right, who had a lot of mileage in the college football playoff run. They really dialed him back from all types of contact that would, typically happen in spring as a running back. Same with like Malachi Toney. He was live for most of the spring, but in the spring game, they didn't play him. So, and some of the O linemen and D linemen, similar type stories with the bubble wrapping. So they certainly dialed back some of those guys, but the guys who were good to go, young guys looking to prove themselves, it was full throttle. And Mario Cristobal runs a physical practice and physical camp. So still a lot of physicality, but the guys that had kind of proven themselves, he definitely bubble wrapped them to preserve them.
Sure.
And also make sure they're fresh for this year.
Any big overriding stories come out of spring down there?
I mean, look, they let me watch every scrimmage, right, from this spring. And the big question is quarterback Darian Mensah. How's he look? How's he compare to Carson Beck? How's he also compare to Cam Ward? And, he's impressive. He's not Cam Ward, but I would say he's more in that mold of style of quarterback in terms of more of a gunslinger, guy that gets it out quick, guy that can improvise outside the pocket. Doesn't quite have the juice in his arm that Cam Ward has, but he's going to be a very, very productive college quarterback, and he's got a ton of weapons to work with on offense at Miami. Like, I said Malachi Toney didn't play in the spring game, but I saw him in all the scrimmages, and somehow he's just taken his game to an even another level compared to his freshman year. He was just unguardable this spring, and really the question mark to address that Miami had to address was on the offensive line. They had to replace 4 starters from last year. They're throwing a true freshman left tackle into the deep end in Jackson Cantwell, and it's sink or swim time for him. So that's going to be kind of the big area to watch when Miami plays Notre Dame in November, the offensive line. And look, I do think, it's going to take some time to gel, but I from a Miami standpoint, I like that Miami is going to have about 8 games to get things together before they go play Notre Dame. I think if it was like last year's situation where Miami had to start the year against Notre Dame, I would feel very uneasy about Miami's chances to win that game because the offensive line is so new and coming together, et cetera. So those were kind of the highlights of the spring.
Yeah, this is the year that Notre Dame would actually like that game to be at the front of the schedule, I'm sure. But, like you said, you take what by the time you get to November anyways, someone's, you're going to have guys who are banged up for both teams. Things can look a lot different from the start of the season. It sounds like you don't necessarily expect the offense to change much, though, going from Carson Beck to Mensah.
I think it'll be much more explosive. I think the style is going to be the same. Shannon Dawson's still the same OC. But like you have Malachi Toney, 1,000-yard receiver at a slot. Also with Mensah came Cooper Barkate, Duke receiver, who had 1,000 yards last year. And they also have Vendravius Jacobs, transfer from South Carolina. Cam Vaughn, transfer from West Virginia. They got some second and third year players bubbling up to push for starting roles too. So the wide receiver core is more explosive. I think the running back core is more explosive as well. It's really just, look, last year's offense, they definitely embrace more of a ground and pound ball control style offense. But it's going to be the same play, same system. It's just you're going to have kind of more explosive players running it, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And that you touched on that offensive line. It sounds like that's probably the biggest question mark they have on the offensive side of the ball, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And look, from a Miami standpoint, you kind of at this point blindly trust Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal to get it together to at least a above average to good level. Um, and I think it will be at least that level. I think the question mark is it going to be good enough to go out and handle business against a Notre Dame? Is it going to be good enough to go out and handle business in the college football playoff when every team has a good defensive line? So that's the question to me. And I don't know if we'll even know that answer until Miami plays Notre Dame. I will say, like, it's a bunch of new guys, but the body types, the talent, it's lots of former 5-star recruits that are now getting their opportunities. It looks the part. It just has to gel and come together. And so, it's just an unknown until you see it on the field.
Yeah. And on the other side of the ball, defensive line, obviously you lose, the offensive line obviously lost a guy to the first round of the draft, but
Yep.
you lose both Bain and Mesidor in the
Yep.
first round of the draft. And, obviously those are two guys specific to the Notre Dame game, but all season long, they had a lot of impact to both be first round guys. How are things shaping up there for who's going to step in for them?
No doubt. Those are big shoes to fill. Those are the two guys that, in my opinion, was the reason why Miami made it to the national championship game, because they just wrecked the game for the opposing offense, everyone they faced. And look, I think this year's defensive line is talented. It's going to be more of like a deeper rotation because Bain and Mesidor never came off the field. Those guys averaged like 50 to 60 snaps per game, which, as you know, is extremely rare. And their motors never stopped. Like the effort never dipped on snap 60 compared to snap 1. This year's D-line, it's still a lot of guys that played as rotational players last year and they're former 5-star recruits, so they are talented, but now they're the guy. Now they're starters. A guy like Marquise Lightfoot from Chicago's area. Justin Scott is a defensive tackle. He made a big play in that Notre Dame game. I believe he forced a fumble, if I recall correctly. Former 5-star recruit, D tackle. He's now expected to be the man. Ahmad Moten returns. He's going to be a senior at defensive tackle. He got like some third round NFL draft buzz, when people were looking ahead from this 2026 NFL draft. So he's a guy that's viewed as an NFL type player. Then you bring in Damon Wilson from Missouri, a guy from the SEC who had 9 sacks last year, over 50 pressures. So look, I think they're going to be a good D-line again. I just don't think it's going to be a special elite defensive line like we saw last year. I don't know, the rest of my life covering Miami Hurricanes, I don't know if I ever see a defensive end tandem like Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor. So it'll be a little bit of a step back in my mind, but I still think, honestly, I think it's going to be like a top 7-ish defensive line in the country. So I think it's going to be a good group.
I mean, overall, I would have to think, would you be shocked if we're not talking about Miami in the playoffs in December?
I would be shocked. I think just from the standpoint of because as we talked about, right, Louisville and SMU beat Miami. That kind of knocked them out of the ACC championship game with their tiebreakers. I would be surprised if Miami's not the ACC champion this year. And so I think that would be their, easiest path to the playoff this year. I just think they're kind of you look at it and look, we got to play the games. I get that. But just on paper, Miami's kind of head and shoulders from a roster standpoint, talent standpoint from the rest of the ACC right now. And, they don't have to play SMU. They don't have to play Louisville this year. And so I would be surprised if they are not the ACC representative for the college football playoff.
Did I really see they've never won an ACC championship since coming in? Was it 2004 they entered the league?
Correct. That is correct. So they've only been to the game once. So they made it once in 2017. That was the year of the turnover chain. That's when they played Notre Dame in Hard Rock.
That's right.
So
that's right.
They made it there. They lost to Clemson 38-3 in that game. Haven't been back. So that is also a significant goal for Mario Cristobal in the program this year. They want to get that, monkey off their back and finally go win the ACC in football this year.
Man, that's kind of amazing when you think
Yes.
Miami football and they've never won an ACC championship, especially when you look at, like you said, it's with the exception of that dominant run that Clemson had, it's been pretty out there for the taking in most years. But Miami has also gone from, maybe I won't say Cinderella, but just where they've come from. They've been a little bit more underdogish for the last 15 or so years. Where now, I think, like you said, they sounds like they relish kind of being back on top and being able to be much more of a bully or a villain, or however you want to put it.
I think they learned how to win last year in that college football playoff run. And I think that experience can't be, you just got to go through it. And that's how you learn. I think when Mario Cristobal first showed up, right, like he was kind of surprised because he hadn't been around the program in 10 plus years. And he was surprised about just the mentality of Miami when he first arrived, and a lot of players that would quit, a lot of players that wouldn't fight to stay in games or win games. And so that was a big process. College football coaches are big into culture, and so
Sure.
I think he was pleased in the college football playoff run and felt like, okay, the culture is starting to take root, and now he sees Miami as a program that's finally the Miami that he played at back when Miami was legitimately a power.
Well, I was going to say, there are plenty of schools. It's like you want to bring back an alum. You obviously don't want to bring back an alum to be the head coach just to say you brought back an alum, but he is connected to probably the greatest single era of Miami football. The Jimmy Johnson era and that time. So he obviously knows what culture is like, having the right kind of culture. He had a good culture, I guess, to model.
It's that. It's, he played for it at Miami. He coached under it at Alabama with Nick Saban. I think that he learned a lot with Nick, right? Where, how do you operate in this modern day? And, he definitely cut his teeth at FIU as a head coach. He also got valuable experience at Oregon, where he learned the importance of resources there, of course, as well as at Alabama. But I think it's, he had to be patient to get his opportunity at Miami, but I think he would tell you those experiences were invaluable, and he probably wouldn't be as successful at Miami if he didn't go through those experiences.
Sure. David Lake, he covers Miami Hurricanes football for InsideTheU.com. I actually heard Kevin Clark, I heard an interview he was doing with somebody, and he name dropped you. Talking about, he said he listens to David Lake and reads David Lake's stuff, and that's kind of what jarred me. I'm like, it feels like it's time to get David on when I heard Kevin Clark.
There you go. Yeah, Kevin's a good friend. As there's a lot of college football sickos out there, and so I'm surprised by the people that read and consume my stuff. I'm sure the same could be said for you. But I love it. College football is the best, and I love that there's so many passionate fans out there.
Awesome. Great stuff. David Lake, always great to have you. Appreciate you doing this in June. We'll have to connect when we get a little bit closer to November 7th again.
Anytime you need me, I'm here.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, David. The fans were even nice. I even saw some compliments for you in there. All right. Enjoy that Miami sun. It looks like you've been getting some out there. Or I guess you're on the other side of the
Yes. Yeah. Right? I'm in Naples, technically. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks again, David.
Take care.
All right, that's David Lake from InsideTheU.com, covering the Miami Hurricanes. We'll take a break. When we come back, rapid fire time. Jesse will be back in. We will actually talk some more Notre Dame Miami. We'll also talk about what happened with Brendan Sorsby and the decision by the NFL today not to hold a supplemental draft that would have allowed Brendan Sorsby to enter the NFL this season. So we'll talk about that and more coming up in rapid fire in hour number 2 of the show on Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com. Welcome back to the show. It is hour number 2, weekday sports beat with irishbreakdown.com. Glad to have you with us. Thanks again to David Lake from InsideTheU.com, talking a little Miami Hurricanes football with him, getting some perspective there. Quick repeat of the top news of the day regarding Notre Dame. They got a commitment today from Segun Alexander, 4-star defensive lineman. The Fighting Irish beat out Clemson, Texas A&M, and, of course, a few others for the talents of the Georgia native. He's a reclassification from 2028 to the 2027 class. Brian Driscoll from irishbreakdown.com will be on with me at the start of tomorrow's show to talk more about Segun Alexander and some more of the commitments the Fighting Irish have picked up. Jesse, Notre Dame continues to rake them in. Talked a little bit about this with Brian. This reclassification thing has become very popular. Teddy Gerard did it. Champ Mons is doing it as well. I'm not sure how I feel about these big guys, where physicality and size and everything is such a much. I know he's a big guy. I mean, he is a defensive lineman. Feels like, there could be some more potential impact for those kind of guys when you're moving up a year early, skipping a year and getting to college a full year early. What do you think? Mute.
What you're basically saying is you would rather see guys, skill and finesse. You're not as much concerned about them, but guys who play
like those
more physical positions like defensive line, offensive line, linebacker.
Right.
Is your body physically, ready for the demands of playing college football, college velocity, college tackling, the play-to-play physicality? It's hard to say. I feel like some of these high schoolers are much bigger these days, and the odds of them playing right of way are slim as is. And so, Notre Dame gets their hands on them. They go through some weight training and that sort of thing. I'm not overly concerned about it, but I see your point. It is, if I were a parent, I'd be concerned. Like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to go on and go against these big boys a year early? But that's a decision that they make. And like I said, I think it helps that most of the time these guys, they enroll early as well. And so they get some time to develop and get in the weight room and that sort of stuff.
Joe says, don't forget about the academics, different as well. I mean, obviously you're moving up a year, but if you can graduate a high school a year early, you're someone who's got your academics figured out. So I'm not as concerned about that because again, you still have to meet the academic standard to do that and be accepted by Notre Dame. So like, to me, it's more the physical nature of things, just how your body develops when you're that age. But I mean, hey, Notre Dame is comfortable with it. He's comfortable with it. He's able to get in academically. So it's all good. We will see how things play out for Segun Alexander and many others as Marcus Freeman continues to add to this very talented 2027 recruiting class. All right, I've got some more Miami thoughts in rapid fire today. Kind of went with thematic after David Lake talked a little Miami in the last hour of the show. Fill in the blank. Notre Dame Miami on November 7th has the chance to be the biggest regular season home game for the Fighting Irish since blank.
Honestly, I'm going to go since Texas A&M of last season. I think that there was a lot of expectations for Notre Dame playing an SEC opponent at home. I don't think many people saw Texas A&M kind of, running with the SEC as they did until they kind of fell on their face at the last game of the season with Texas. But I think that there was a lot of anticipation going into that Texas A&M game, knowing, what will come of it and the implications that it would have on the playoffs. So, I know it was only a year ago, but I think that Texas A&M game stacks up pretty mightily to it.
Wow, I didn't realize you were going to go the Mike Greenberg route and just be prisoner of the moment, caught in, little nearsightedness with your with the game that you're. I think it's got a chance to be the biggest Notre Dame home game when you talk about hype, hoopla, players on both sides of the ball, the whole thing. And you're talking about a couple of rivals getting involved since Notre Dame, Southern Cal in October 2005. I'm going back 21 years on this sucker. There was so much hype going into that game. I mean, you had, defending national champion USC, Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, Lendale White, that whole crew. And then, you had, like Notre Dame up-and-comers, Brady Quinn, Jeff Samardzija, and, on and on and on, Charlie Weiss mania and everything else that year. And the fact that we've got, like last year, there was hype on that game, but I just feel like after everything, the way Notre Dame and Miami ended up being connected from that first game of CJ Carr's career for one, but from that game, Miami wins a close one, loses a couple of games. They're both in playoff, going back and forth, all the vitriol back and forth, and now all the hype and expectations of this game. I'm going back to 2005. Notre Dame USC. That's the one I'm going to. I feel like there is already so much talk about this game months before the season has ever started for a game that's going to take place in November. So that's the one I'm going to. Notre Dame Southern Cal. And you were there. Like, did it feel different in the stadium for you that day?
Yeah, I mean, you could feel the tension. You knew the implications of the game. You knew, the winner was likely going to move on and have chances and their aspirations fulfilled to go on to a national championship. And the loser, unfortunately, was just going to come up short, right? And it being played at Notre Dame, you felt like they had the edge because it was home field. And that's usually the deciding factor in a lot of neutral matchups, essentially. So I like yours. You went a bit into the archives, but with Notre Dame losing to Miami last season and knowing how good Texas A&M was, it felt like that game already had a lot of pressure on it as well.
That's true. And I mean, you might even just go, a year or so before that, Notre Dame, Ohio State, there was a good amount of hype on that one. Obviously, you had the McAfee show here, and I believe Game Day was here and the whole thing. But I feel like that the hype for that Notre Dame Southern Cal game was even greater than those. Game Day was here that weekend as well. So this is Notre Dame Miami game, especially when you look at what's on what else is on the schedule for both teams. It's going to get a lot of national attention. So that's the one I'm going with, just like that Notre Dame USC game got a lot of national attention. Fill in the blank. The biggest miss in evaluation we had of Notre Dame before last year's opener at Miami was blank.
Was Miami's offensive line. I think that we didn't give it enough credit. We didn't give, there was a lot of pieces kind of transferring in along the offensive line, and it turned out to be one of the biggest, most mauling units, in all of college football. They had massive offensive linemen. I think that there was an expectation that it would be good, but Notre Dame's defensive line would prove to be better, and it was the opposite. I felt like Miami's offensive line kind of dominated Notre Dame in the trenches, especially early on in the game, kind of landed some of those haymakers early, and it showed as Miami jumped out to an early lead. And anyone that wants to say the defense, I don't necessarily agree with the Notre Dame's defense, because we all thought that was going to be, one of the more shining aspects going into the season. We didn't know that Chris Ash would struggle early on as much as he did.
No, you're right about that. I think it's, probably our evaluation of Notre Dame's offensive line, because we thought that the experience, especially with the tackles of Emil Wagner and Anthony Knapp, was going to mean a lot more than what it did, in that game. But then, maybe we can also say to some extent, Messidor and Bain. We definitely talked a lot about Bain and how good he can be, not as much about Messidor, but the success that Bain and Messidor had against Knapp and Emil Wagner, who were both returning starters, we thought that they were going to have a heck of a lot more success against Miami, specifically in that game. And, even overall as the season wore on, but specific to that game, we thought it would be a little bit more of a stalemate, or a push. But like Bain and Messidor obviously ended up being huge difference makers in that game, and unfortunately Knapp and Wagner, after with a year of experience under their belts as starting tackles on each side, just were not ready for the task in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to get even more broad, I think you could say that the trenches in general, Notre Dame's offensive line didn't do as good versus Miami's defensive line as expected, and vice versa. Notre Dame's defensive line didn't do as well against Miami's offensive line. So Miami won the trenches, and they won it, pretty convincingly, especially early on.
Nope, that is for sure. And I was looking a couple of things up here. Irish Chi-Town says Carson Beck. I thought Beck was good in that game. I didn't think he was great in that game, though. Did you?
I mean, he wasn't spectacular. And if we all remember correctly, one of those big plays, he just chucked it up and hoped that his wide receiver came down with it, and the ball went, prematurely through a Notre Dame defensive back's hands. So that ball should have been intercepted. Carson Beck got relatively lucky. And then the across the body throw to Malachi Toney on the other side of the field. I mean, that again, I'm not going to say that nothing was skill, but Carson Beck was throwing up a couple prayers. And that's who he is. We saw that later on down the line when they lost to Louisville, SMU. He had bad interceptions where he turned the ball over in the red zone. That should have happened against Notre Dame, and it would have completely changed the outcome of the game. But, sometimes you get lucky in football.
John Doe says my take on Miami's receivers. I stand by what I see. Malachi Toney, yeah, really good. He had over 1,000 yards. I said going into the game, the matchup of the game was going to be Toney against Notre Dame's nickel, and it did not go well for Notre Dame. I still say that the way Notre Dame played Miami defensively, look, we can all agree that Chris Ash's defensive philosophy, those first few games with all the soft zone and the off coverage and everything else, was not the way to go. And that was my take on that. Like neither Toney nor CJ Daniels just lit up Notre Dame. Toney had 6 catches for 82 yards. Daniels had 5 for 46. Well, why did they combine for 11 catches in that game? Because Notre Dame was willing to play so much zone and let Carson Beck, get the ball to them as much as possible. And, obviously the play to Daniels, the touchdown catch, great catch by him. But if Adon Schuler plays him, and actually, plays him / plays the ball, there's a different outcome on that play. But, again, soft in the zone. So they have Malachi Toney is obviously going to be one of the best receivers in Miami history, which is saying something considering the receivers that have come out of there. But overall, as a unit, that was my take on Miami's receivers, that you didn't have, a game-wrecking bunch of receivers out there. They didn't wreck the game in terms of, you had to worry about them taking the top off so much, but that's how Chris Ash decided to play him.
Yeah, and it was unfortunate because, I think both coordinators, we've talked about this, I feel like ad nauseum in the past, both coordinators.
It's been months since we talked about it, though, so.
Both coordinators let, their respective side of the ball down. Mike Denbrock was kind of scared conservative with CJ Carr early on, and Chris Ash wanted to sit back and play soft zones, and rather than kind of, manning up and risk giving up the big play. But Notre Dame's been that kind of defense for the last 3 or 4 seasons. So you had to know that that's what they were going to be good at.
Here's I guess the point that I made coming out, was that Miami's receivers, again, were not so great, in terms of speed, that you had to focus so much attention on them not beating you deep. Both Toney and Daniels last year, 2 of their best receivers, they only averaged 11 yards per catch. That's my point. That's a lot of underneath dink and dunk type stuff, so that's why I felt like Notre Dame could have afforded, and look, I think we all felt like this. Notre Dame could have afforded to play much more man-to-man and be more physical with those guys and probably had more success. I don't think they combined for 11 catches if Notre Dame does more of that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's really only certain teams that warrant that type of coverage. And I don't know if they were still shell-shocked from the national championship game against Ohio State, but that's a room where you've just got wide receivers everywhere that you can't afford to play as much man-to-man because there are 3 different guys on the field that can beat you. My philosophy personally would have been, we're good at man, and until we get burned in man, there's no reason not to get out of it. Yeah. Like you can start the game in man, and if you start getting burned a little bit, then okay, yeah, let's switch it up. But why would you, in that game, that environment, that atmosphere, why would you start conservative and try to go work your way back up to, being more aggressive? I would start aggressive, and if it's starting to burn us, then okay, we'll ease up here a little bit.
Yeah. And again, we don't have to rehash it because it is history, but look, it had a huge impact on the season. Really, Ash's misevaluation of what he had and with the guys that he had in that secondary and what he could do with them. I mean, that impacted basically the first 3+ games of the season. All right, moving on, turning the page. Maybe Miami's on the schedule 6 times, as on Notre Dame's schedule 6 times from this season through 2037. Is that too much, not enough, or just the right amount of times that the Irish and Hurricanes will play from this season through 2037? 6 times.
Yeah, so basically, if my math is right, you got 2026, and then to 2037. That's 11 seasons, so you're playing about 50% of the time. I think I would want to see maybe a little bit more, but I'm comfortable with where they're at. I think it's nice to see Miami kind of return to the schedule and potentially kind of turn into, some sort of rivalry again, because I've always said rivalries don't exist unless both teams are, solid teams, right? Like if Miami's not good at football and Notre Dame is, and Notre Dame is just beating up on Miami, or vice versa, say Notre Dame kind of goes in the tank and Miami starts, consistently turning out to be one of the best teams in the country. No one wants to see that. That's not considered a rivalry when one team is just beating up on the other. So I hope that both teams can sustain their success moving forward. And if so, I'd like to see them play a little bit more and this kind of turn into, some sort of rivalry, especially considering we don't know what's going to happen with USC moving forward.
Yeah, that's exactly the way I'm looking at it. And, like when you look at where Notre Dame's schedule ended up going with the alternating Southern Cal and Stanford taking turns Thanksgiving weekend, I think it's easy to forget. I mean, this predates you even being born. And, like Notre Dame and Miami back in that, late 80s, early 90s, they used to play not every year, but I think it was either 89 or 90 when they played in Miami. They were playing Thanksgiving weekend as well, so I think if they could work it out, it'd be great to have Miami more regularly in late November, and maybe, they alternate November home and home going forward. So 6 times is a nice starting point to me. And you do have to balance it some, with like what you have coming up on future schedules. Like you've got Indiana and Alabama. You've already got Florida State and Clemson also on the schedule, all at the same time in 2030. For example, you definitely don't want to, to overcompensate and overschedule, like you've got Florida and Clemson and Indiana and Miami in the same time, in the same season in 2031. I think every other year is good. If it makes sense for both teams, I wouldn't mind seeing a couple more times added on there. Like Notre Dame has gone outside the ACC and scheduled this series with Clemson, and like those Notre Dame Clemson games that weren't already prearranged by the ACC, they don't count against the ACC allotment. So if both sides can make it work, 6 is a good starting point, but I wouldn't mind as much as 7 or 8 if they can do it, so they're playing. Like I've said this plenty of times. one of the great things about college football and what makes college football so great is rivalries. Rivalries are just different in college sports compared to professional sports, especially since, like in pro sports, typically you play your rivals at least a couple times a year. In football, it's not the same. You play everybody once a year unless you end up playing them again in the playoffs. And there's a lot of anticipation already for November 7th. And these are two programs that once upon a time, back when Pete Bavacqua was at Notre Dame, or maybe just before he got to Notre Dame, they were playing very regularly. I would love to see it even more often going forward.
Yeah, I would tend to agree.
All right, so we're going to continue with one more question on the Miami train. We're going to do guess the over-under season win total for the Miami Hurricanes. And so what we do, we go through Miami's schedule, and then we are not guessing how many games they are going to win. We are guessing what we think FanDuel has their over-under season win total set at. So, are you ready?
I am ready.
Let's take a look at Miami's schedule. At Stanford.
That's a win.
That's a win. Florida A&M.
Easily a win.
2-0. At Wake Forest.
That's a win.
Central Michigan.
Also a win.
At Clemson.
This is where I'll put it in the toss-up category.
I think so as well.
At Clemson, I think Clemson's going to be obviously better than last season. I think Dabo's got a good bit to prove in this season, so that's a toss-up game for me.
How about the 2 weeks later, actually, but their next game, Florida State. They're right.
Again, that's a toss-up for me as well, just because of the rivalry. I think Florida State's going to be better this season. So, while I think Miami might win, it's still going to land in that toss-up category for me.
I concur. I think that you have to put it in there. So we've got two toss-ups so far, Clemson and Florida State. Then they play Pittsburgh.
That's a win.
Should be a W. At North Carolina.
Should be a win.
At Notre Dame.
That's another toss-up.
Okay, so we've got three toss-ups. Duke at home.
That's a win.
They host Virginia Tech. This a little bit of an X factor game, potentially. Could sneak up depending on what James Franklin's got this in you.
Yeah, and I think what could likely happen is they could beat a team like Clemson, but then lose to a team like Virginia Tech, because they did have the two blunders, to Louisville and SMU last season. I think I'm going to give them the win, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's a tough game.
Okay. And then they close with Boston College.
That is a win. So that puts me at 9 wins and 3 toss-ups. So I'm going to land at 9.5 for Miami. And I think, here's what I'll say. I think it's going to be 9.5, and it'll be really heavily favored, like something like minus 160.
Okay.
And if it's 10.5, I think it'll be at plus money. But I think that right now I would lean towards 9.5 with Miami.
All right. You haven't looked, right?
No.
Okay. So we've got some people thinking in the same ballpark. Josh says 10.5. Robin says 10.5. John says 11.5. I think that's a little high. And Chi-Town says 9.5. So John is basically saying he thinks that Miami goes 11-1 and they lose to Notre Dame is probably what John is thinking. I think a lot of, at least the lose to Notre Dame, a lot of Notre Dame fans would be in on. The other part, I'm going 10.5 though.
Ooh.
Yeah. So you're saying 9.5 with the 3 toss-up games being Notre Dame, Clemson, and Florida State, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to say that Miami's is 10.5. That's what I'm going to go with. So I got my app ready to go in advance this time. I've messed up a few times, like taking too long. So without further ado, FanDuel has Miami's regular season win total for the 2026 season at 10.5. They are minus 28 on the over, plus 104 on the under.
Interesting. So they must be giving them that Florida State game. It must just be Notre Dame and Clemson as the toss-ups.
That's what it feels like they are looking at. So 10.5 for the Miami Hurricanes.
While I feel like that's really optimistic and I genuinely agree, but again, like look at Miami last year. You can't tell me
Last 2 years.
that they're just going to take care of business against everyone that they're supposed to. And now, especially with Carson Beck being gone,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I feel like that's a line that's a little juiced in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the last 2 years, they've lost games that on paper you would say they weren't supposed to lose. They lose 2 out of 3 to Louisville and SMU last year, and the year before, like they cruise into November and then all of a sudden, boom, they lose to both Georgia Tech and then Syracuse to close out the regular season, and that was with Cam Ward as the quarterback. So
should have lost to who was it? UCLA too, or I can't remember who it was, but they were
UCLA.
It was a night game towards the end of this. Wherever Cal is, because that's where Mendoza was before he went to IU. They had a storm back to beat Cal.
They just beat Cal by a point. That was in October, actually, as I'm sitting here looking at the schedule. So, all right. So John is asking, Jesse, would you bet the under then on 10.5?
100%, especially if they're giving it to you at plus money. I think Miami is going to end up at 10-2. Might they finish 11-1? I think that largely will revolve around whether or not they beat Notre Dame or not. But I do see them. I would take the under on this.
Wow. So you're pretty firm. You think they're going 10-2?
Well, I think Notre Dame is definitely beating them, and I think they'll stumble once more outside of that. I don't think they're going to be perfect outside of Notre Dame.
Okay. And that will be in November, which is, I guess it was October they stumbled last year. 2 years ago, it was November. That's right. Jesse the Greek making his picks in there.
Are we moving on to the
NBA? By the way, one other Miami note. Did you see Jake Ferguson married one of the Cavender twins, Haley Cavender, over the weekend?
I did not see that. I knew that they were engaged. I knew that he was with one of the Cavender twins. Godspeed for him, because I feel like that's a lot to keep up with.
I do too.
It's almost like the Kardashian curse, in my opinion.
I'm honestly kind of surprised that they don't have some kind of reality show. But then, I mean, obviously you had Carson back, in the mix. It's been about a year and a half or so.
Yeah.
With the other sister. They had a ranch dressing fountain at the insistence of Jake Ferguson, apparently, at their wedding reception. A ranch fountain.
I love me some ranch. That might be a bit too far.
He was loving the ranch, boys. All right, let's do this. Let's do Brendan Ferguson. The NFL has decided. I had Jake Ferguson on the mind. Sorry. Brendan Sorsby. NFL has decided not to hold a supplemental draft for Brendan Sorsby. That means that Sorsby's only way to enter the draft now is going to be miss the upcoming season and enter the 2027 regular NFL draft pool. Here is part of the letter that the NFL sent to Sorsby. It references a supplemental draft hasn't been held in several years, and it says, your petition filed 3 days before the deadline without any supporting information or documentation, and only after abandoning your recent litigation efforts to avoid NCAA sanctions, does not provide a basis for the league to alter those plans, adding, it's the NFL's sole discretion whether to hold a supplemental draft, and there will be none in 2026. They go on, the NFL does, to Sorsby. Even after receiving notice of the NCAA's decision rescinding your college eligibility in May, you sought to avoid the consequences of that determination through litigation rather than accepting responsibility for your actions, and you pursued entry into the NFL only after abandoning those efforts. The NFL also told Sorsby basically that there's not enough time to do, the kind of background work on him, to feel confident that, he's moved on from his gambling past. So what do you think about this decision by the NFL, Jesse?
Yeah. So, First, it should be noted that there hasn't been a supplemental draft since 2019. I think they tried to have one in 2023. The guys ended up not getting drafted, I think, or it just didn't pan out. I'm really, really stuck on this one because I do believe that Sorsby deserves punishment, and I don't think that he should be able to just run away from his sanctions from the NCAA like the letter from the NFL stated. But on the flip side of that, I don't understand why the NFL is acting like they're holier than thou when they literally push FanDuel ads down people's throats throughout the entire duration of football games.
Well, but you can still do that and hold your players to a standard. Where I get that. There's the waters are a lot muddier now than they've ever been with all professional sports because all these sports are more than willing to take FanDuel or DraftKings or whoever's money on all this, but you still have to hold your players to the standard, that you're confident that they're not going out there betting money on games that they are also playing in, which is why Sorsby is in this situation, obviously.
Yeah, and I think again that's the side that I agree on is
he didn't bet on games that he played in, but he was on the teams, obviously.
Right, and so that's the side where I kind of agree with is. Obviously, the NFL has put in an effort to crack down on the gambling. They had some issues in the last couple of years where they had to suspend some players. And so I completely agree that it's more than reasonable to say, hey, you filed this petition like 3 days before. We have no idea who you are. All we hear is all the negative press that you're getting from your time at Cincinnati. And then now you try to run away from your consequences, while at Texas Tech. And so basically kind of good on them of saying, listen, we need you to mature more before we can allow you into this league. And so, again, it's
not just going to rush you into the league. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's a slippery slope because the NFL does allow certain players to play, with ongoing issues, problems going on. And so it's just it's a bit of a sticky situation, but I like that they're holding him accountable and saying you can't just run away from all your problems and expect to be able to just run to our league, get drafted, and everything's going to be all fine and dandy.
That's exactly right. Tyler had this question in earlier. He said, do you think if Sorsby would have just declared for the supplemental draft instead of dragging this out till the last minute, do you think there would have been a supplemental draft for him? So essentially he goes into, rehab for the gambling, the same thing that he did, but rather than try to duke it out with the NCAA, he just, tries to declare for the supplemental draft right away. That obviously gives the NFL more time. Do you think it would have worked out differently for him if he had done that?
I think he would have had better odds. Like if once the story broke, he should have
choice of words saying he'd have better odds, but yeah.
Once the story broke, he should have just admitted himself to rehab and immediately said, I'm going to rehab with the aspirations of going to the NFL supplemental draft. During that time leading up to the draft, I'm going to focus on myself, cleaning myself up, His lawyer could have wrote him a nice letter, a memo that he could have, sent out to all the NFL teams. But he should have known right away there was no chance that he was going to play college football again. And immediately from that point, he should have just been preparing himself to clean up his character, to clean up his image, and to declare himself earlier for the draft.
I think so as well. I think he would have had a better chance. There still would be no guarantee because that's still the other side of this. When Texas Tech was recording these videos and throwing them out in everybody's face, trying to defend their decision to allow him to play, they still had no idea whether or not he was going to quote unquote be cured or not that you're ever cured. Once you're an addict of any kind, you're always going to be an addict. But how did anyone know once he comes out of, the counseling or whatever that, how can you feel confident in the span of a couple of months that he's just going to be ready to go and have no temptations and not be dragged right back into it? Again, I don't think in that short amount of time there would be a way for anyone to know. Now, the NFL draft is next April, and that's what he's got to shoot for now. So there's a lot more time for him to do a lot of different things between now and then. So there's a lot more time for everyone involved to get a much more firm grasp on exactly who Brendan Sorsby is and to know whether or not they feel comfortable bringing him in, to that kind of environment, team environment once again.
Definitely agree. And I just kind of I want to get something else in here real quick because we're running up close to time. But as soon as you think the Sorsby thing is over, there's just a new wrinkle that keeps on coming out with him. But
his lawyers already said, by the way, that they plan to file some kind of lawsuit against the NFL. They say it's a violation of the CBA, and they're going
there's
to
the NFL has full discretion of whether or not they want to open up the supplemental draft or not.
Right.
So it's I think he needs to not do that. I think he needs to just take his lumps, spend the next 10 months preparing for the draft.
I do too.
And just be over with it. But NBA draft is tonight. I'm curious to see where your boy Darren Peterson ends up. I forgot the draft was tonight. But the reason why I wanted to bring it up, I know it's everyone's favorite
I think
topic.
Devance is going number 1. I think Peterson goes 2 or 3.
I think so as well, but this class is just loaded in general. Boozer's still in there. You got Darren Peterson, AJ that you brought up, who doesn't want to be a Washington Wizard, but is likely going to be a Washington Wizard.
Who does want to be a Washington Wizard at the end?
I guess Trae Young, he signed a 4-year max extension. So yeah. I don't know. We'll see. But I totally forgot it was tonight, and I wanted to say I'm curious to see where people like Boozer, Peterson, all these. There's a lot of talent in this draft, so it should be pretty fun.
Yep, absolutely. All right, great stuff as always, Jess. Appreciate you. Appreciate everyone in the chat tonight as well. David Lake, thanks to him for talking a little Miami football. We've got South Bend Cubs baseball on the way. Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com.
Peace.